For the second year running, OnePlus is launching a T model phone, and once again the new device brings a few choice upgrades over its immediate predecessor, turning what was already the best $500 flagship into something even more compelling. I'm Alex from Android Central, and this is our review of the OnePlus 5T. So the 5T brings us a more up-to-date take on what is by now a very familiar design. While the footprint and in-hand feel of the OnePlus 5T is incredibly familiar, there are some big visual changes in the new phone. The biggest you'll see around the front, the new 6-inch 18:9 display. It's still Optic AMOLED like the OnePlus 5, but in a taller 2160x1080 panel that gives you more room for apps, multitasking, photos, or anything else. And it's a good looking display, bright and vivid with good viewing angles, and OnePlus's shiny new stock wallpapers and clean UI are a great fit for this expansive, colourful display. And for what it's worth, the jelly scrolling problem that some folks complained about on the OnePlus 5 has been banished from the newer model. The new screen is the main centerpiece of the 5T, and as a result of this taller, more modern aspect ratio, you get slimmer bezels, on-screen keys, and the fingerprint scanner has been relocated around the back of the phone. Eagle-eyed OnePlus fans might also spot that the camera bump now blends more smoothly into the body of the phone, which is a nice bit of additional polish. Incidentally, that fingerprint scanner is not the only way to unlock the 5T. OnePlus has built out a speedy and actually really convenient face recognition system that's so fast you might not even see the lock screen when unlocking, though you do trade security for that added convenience, of course. Otherwise, from the outside, this is basically a OnePlus 5 only with more display and less bezel, and I'm pretty happy about that. The anodized aluminium chassis is a little slick in the hand, but it's also thin, stylish, and comfortable to hold. Again, I want to underscore how much more modern the 5T looks this time around, even though it's keeping the popular midnight black chassis largely untouched in this mid-cycle refresh. That same black colour, by the way, is the only colour option available for the 5T at launch. On the inside, the 5T runs the same solid platform as the OnePlus 5. No internal upgrades this time, not that there's really anything to upgrade to. It's running a Snapdragon 835, and you get 6GB of RAM and 64GB of storage for $499, or 8GB of RAM and 128GB of storage for $569. There's the same dash-charging 3300mAh battery under the hood as well, which is still good for about a full day of use despite the larger display area. And for frequent travelers, yep, it's still a single global SKU supporting just about every LTE band under the sun, with dual SIM capabilities to boot. Besides the screen, the other major hardware upgrade in the OnePlus 5T is the camera setup. The dual camera array around the back looks similar, but the secondary telephoto lens is gone, replaced with a 20-megapixel sensor behind an f1.7 lens. The whole point of the second camera now is to improve low-light photography, an area where the OnePlus 5 was just an average performer. Now, OnePlus uses a kind of pixel binning, combining data from groups of pixels on the sensor to produce clearer, sharper shots in very low light. For the most part, it works okay, and is a noticeable improvement over the OnePlus 5, although I've got to question why you need a second lens to do this, as opposed to just sourcing a single sensor that's good in both daylight and low light. One other benefit of the second camera is portrait mode, which makes a return on the 5T, and works okay most of the time, though not as well as more expensive rivals. Anyway, all this camera swapping is handled automatically. In brighter conditions, the phone uses the main camera, when it gets darker, it switches to the secondary camera. And for the main camera, it's still a 16-megapixel Sony sensor behind an f1.7 lens, and it still takes decent photos in most conditions, just like the OnePlus 5 did. The big trade-off this time is that you no longer have a dedicated telephoto camera, and at first I had mixed feelings about this, but the more I use the 5T, the more it seems like a reasonable compromise. In darker conditions, the OnePlus 5 would switch to a digital zoomed crop of the main sensor anyway, because the old telephoto camera was just so weak in low light. There have been a handful of other camera improvements too, like the redesigned camera UI that takes advantage of the taller screen, and enhancements to OnePlus's electronic image stabilization for video, which was already pretty good on the 5. But the bottom line is this is the OnePlus 5's camera, but now you trade the telephoto lens for a decent step up in low-light photography. Around the front, it's a familiar high-megapixel selfie experience, a 16-megapixel Sony sensor behind an f2.0 lens, which is decent if a little lacking in low light. There are of course a few things that you don't get when you're paying just $500 for a flagship tier phone. The 5T still lacks water resistance, there's no optical stabilization in either camera, which is the traditional way to improve low light shots, And just as we're starting to see some other phones ship on Android Oreo, the 5T leaves the factory with the older Android 7.1.1. An update to 8.0 is promised in the new year, with a beta release arriving before the end of December. That's not to say there haven't been software improvements though. OxygenOS 4.7 brings numerous tweaks to the launcher, like new easier-to-reach folders and updated widgets. And there are new gestures for that rear-facing fingerprint scanner as well, like a swipe down for the notification shade, or a long press to take photos in the camera app. The on-screen keys can be customized too, with the option to hide them behind a swipe-up gesture and take full advantage of that giant 18:9 display. And the new Parallel Apps feature lets you run multiple instances of apps like WhatsApp, Facebook, or Twitter to keep your work and personal accounts separate. Besides this sprinkling of new features, you get everything that was great about the OnePlus 5 software. A clean, fast Android experience that's a joy to use, even though it's not yet running the latest version of the OS. So with this year's mid-cycle refresh, OnePlus has changed more on the outside than the inside, which makes the 5T more of an obvious upgrade than the jump from OnePlus 3 to 3T last year. Ultimately though, it's basically just a nicer OnePlus 5, which, as it turns out, still makes for a pretty decent product. The 5T is as well balanced a phone as you're gonna find at this price point, and really great value for $499 or even $569. Sure, it won't do everything that a $1,000 phone does in terms of photography and water resistance and a few other things, but in terms of just being a really solid phone for the money, and throwing in some necessary upgrades to the display and camera to keep things up to date, it's hard not to recommend the OnePlus 5T whether you're buying outright in the US or on contract in Europe. That's it for now, thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the latest Android reviews and opinions as they land.